Hello, climbers, and welcome to Season 3 of Climbing Mount CMMC.
Welcome back, climbers, and thank you for joining us in another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. I'm Bobby Gary, your host, and my co-host is Kaleigh Floyd. We are a managed service provider that's level 2 certified, and today we're going to be talking about marketing challenges, the sales process. There's nobody better to talk about it than Kaleigh.
Don't hype me up too much or they're going to be disappointed.
Don't say that. That's not true. To be honest with you, I think you do undersell yourself as far as in your experience and time and grade of working through this challenge of coming from a few years ago saying, hey, we're going to be tackling this thing about CMMC and not really having much experience of working in it. And then going from that. That was a huge challenge, Kaleigh. I think sometimes you don't give yourself enough credit for that.
Well, for those of you who don't know, I am the Director of Business Development at Axiom, which means I oversee the marketing and the sales. And about 3 or 4 years ago, Bobby did come to me and say, hey, we're going to be transitioning to this CMMC thing for our company. So you better figure it out and learn how to market it. And if you're wondering, I did not find anybody that could give me a direction on how to market it because nobody was marketing it at the time.
Right.
And so I did kind of learn as I went. And I will say that now we're starting to fully grasp and fully see, I guess you could say, the seeds that were planted 4 years ago, turning into trees. So I am excited to share kind of how I went about doing this, how I'm doing it now in the sales process, and hopefully those of you who are also building these processes can learn from my mistakes or successes. So There you go.
Well, there's just so many different ways to attack CMMC, and I think marketing is probably no different. I just know that we had so many giants to tackle when we were going in our journey. I was like, Kaleigh, you take the marketing and sales side of it. We're going to be over here killing these giants. Let's kind of turn our backs to each other and start fighting. And that's what we did, right? For several years going through to work through this process. And so I'm really excited to kind of talk about some of the points that you had shared. And then Kaleigh, you can just sort of expound upon them. And then for those that are listening, if you have other questions, please put it in the comments. Kaleigh could definitely reply back, or we could possibly do another episode and talk about it. So the first one we have here is finding the right doors to knock on. And that's a pretty big deal because I think sometimes what I've seen, and it's funny, I've been to several conferences, and managed service providers will put their booth out, and they'll be like, well, no one's swarming to me because I tell them that I'm able to support CMMC. Can you kind of expound on that and like where people sort of go wrong and right?
Yeah, so I think one thing to emphasize is if you're an ESP or an MSP listening to this and you're trying to get into the CMMC space, I say get into the CMMC space because it's a different type of space than you were probably marketing to before. So it is not commercial, it is a different environment. You're not going to find those people probably in the same places that you once were. And what I mean by that is you really have to do your research. What are those types of people looking for? By types of people, I mean contractors in the DIB space and people that work for the Department of Defense or are subcontractors or primes in the space. They are not the same as commercial companies. There are things that look intriguing to them that maybe some commercial companies don't really care for. One thing I will say is branding, reputation, those types of things make a huge difference in this space. They are not just going to walk up to anybody's booth. I think you have to have some sort of rapport that is positive in the space. You have to build yourself. You have to build your own company. You can't just walk in and just expect people to want to see what you do. And one way that, a short example of the way that we did this is this podcast. People started looking at us through here and they were like, oh, these people are doing something that's been, around for a while. And so, we started already building up that reputation and that understanding. And people listen to this and they don't think we don't know anything. They think, oh, we know something. They know some stuff.
Does that mean everybody needs to do a podcast, or do they have a different way to do reputation?
Well,
that's a good point. I think it's worked for us, but it's not obviously going to work for everybody. Like, how can they build their reputation without doing something like we did?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is to be a part of the environment in as many ways as you can. So
That's so true.
another way that's not doing a podcast would be going to events, and not just going to events to sell yourself. That is super annoying. Let me just say that right off the bat. If you go straight to an event and you just start selling your company, that is not a good idea. What you do is you go to these events and you find the people that know more than you about this space, that have been in this space longer than you, and you learn from them and connect with them, because you can't just come in here and make a name for yourself just by, like, talking a lot. Well, you could, but it's probably going to be a bad name for yourself and not a good
Right.
one. So, that is one thing that I will say. Also, if you haven't taken any classes or courses yet, you definitely should be doing that, which is, a
Mhm.
CCP or a CCA class. And when you go into a CCP course, you can learn who that instructor is, learn who the people are in that environment. That gets you connected to people. I would not recommend only using LinkedIn for connections, because there's a lot of crap on there too that could get, piled up. But those are just some examples of how you get your foot in the door. And that isn't necessarily actually knocking on an organization seeking certifications door, but rather
Mhm.
multiple other types of doors. So,
Yeah, we get so many referrals from other organizations because of the reputation that we have built,
mhm.
right? And that is because when we go to the conferences, we did our first booth ever, like just at Seek West.
Yeah.
All the other conferences and things we've attended, like what you're saying, Kaylee, we went there with our notepad and we listened. And
Mhm.
we listened to what the people were saying. We listened to what other. And we went to CMMC Midwest, right? And there were several MSPs that sat up like booths because they had an MSP in that general area, and they just thought if we set up a booth, like people are just going to flock to us because they need MSPs. They
Yeah.
do, but those people never went into the conference. They didn't listen to any of the lessons being spoke about. They just sat there with all their swag, thinking we're just going to get overrun with all this potential business, and that didn't happen.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, so when we look at the situations where we're trying to become leaders, we want to be involved, we want to get connected to the community, we want to start collaborating and sharing so people can start building that trust. But what about transparency? I think that's another key component to build that trust and reputation in the industry. Can you talk to us about that?
So there's two things about this that I want to emphasize. One is people don't like being lied to. Okay, so that's just a given. So if you're saying something in your marketing that is not necessarily true in your services, or you're promising things in your sales calls that aren't necessarily true in your services, you are asking to ruin your reputation. You have to have consistency there. Do not lie to people. The other thing is too, which is the very, very, very big part about the CMMC space, is you could get in a lot of trouble
Mm-hmm.
because there's more legalities to this, and the cyber AB can sometimes call you out in their town halls, which is maybe not fun for some of the things that you're doing online.
True story. It's happened.
True story. That's not made up. And so what I mean by that is, one, think of the client, and two, think of your reputation just in the space with the, accreditation body or the DoD, or, things like that. So there are requirements to these things in the CMMC guide, and like in 32 CFR rule, it literally speaks to these things. The Cyber AB speaks to these things of how you should provide services or what you should and shouldn't say. So if you're not looking at those things, please make sure to. It's even like small things like, and I might be calling out a couple people by saying this, but you're technically not allowed to use a CMMC logo to say you're CMMC level 2 certified, or you're certified in some way, because that's not actually the logo for that. It's the logo for CMMC. It's not for you to say you're certified. So you literally are not supposed to put that CMMC circle on things, but people put it on
All the time.
everything,
Yeah.
but you're not really supposed to do that. So you have to understand and be a part of the environment to know those things as well. Be a part of the town halls, be a part of what's going on, understand the rules. By rules, I mean not just like rules, but like 32 CFR, and what it says in there. Because if you are marketing just random stuff, you could definitely get flamed online or by your potential clients, and you really do
Yeah,
not
this
want that.
community is super passionate. And if you're like, oh, let's talk about the 5 levels of CMMC, you are going to get smoked because there's only 3 and
You
there haven't been
are
5 in
behind.
quite
Yeah.
a while.
Also,
Yeah,
stop
so
saying
they're,
CMMC 2.0. They don't really say that anymore. So yeah, you'll kind of get a little bit sketchy views if you say that too.
it's like talking about your boot camp when you've been serving for 10 years. Like, we're past that now. Let's get into the real world of what we're living in now.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, one of the things that you've seen, I think, which also points into the transparency is so many times I've seen in the sales process, they always try to stay very ambiguous. They don't have much detail. They're terrified of sharing secret sauce. Can you talk a little bit about how we lean into that detail perspective?
Yeah. Well, me personally, I don't believe in secret sauce because there are literally requirements for CMMC. Like, for example, if you are an ESP that is servicing a client and you're handling some of those controls, you're going to get pulled into that organization seeking certifications level 2 certification if they're going for CMMC level 2. And with that comes requirements like your own customer responsibility matrix or CRM. And so if you're like, no, I don't feel comfortable sharing that, what are you talking about? This organization is literally putting so much risk on you for allowing you into their system. That is not secret sauce. That is a standard that they should be able to see. Now, if you want to sign an NDA to be able to show it to them, great. But they should have the ability to see that during your sales process and see how you do that, because this is an insane amount of risk that they are taking for allowing you
Yeah.
into the environment. It's not a secret sauce. It is a baseline that you should have.
Yeah, and like they are spending so much money, it doesn't seem unreasonable to ask for more specifics. And I think it also shows a level of maturity, right? When the organization has at least created some specific sales materials that say, well, maybe we're not going to show you our whole matrix of the responsibility between us and you, but we can give you an excerpt that shows the level of detail of how we work through it and how we would handle maybe some specific controls, maybe show them examples of your system security plan and some other things like that of how you do that. Because now you're getting more specific, and to them, they can be like, okay, they really thought about this. Not only did they think about it from the sales process of creating this material so that it helps me feel more comfortable, chances are they're also just as prepared when it comes time to implementation. And I think that's a big deal.
Yes, and to even go back to emphasize being transparent for the marketing, the sales, and the services, all 3 in a row. This shows, like, this kind of maturity that somebody would have shows that all of those pieces are talking to each other, right? Because you cannot have the salesperson doing willy-nilly stuff inside of their meeting when they have not talked with the service team or know what the service team is actually doing during those processes, you know? And same for the marketing. The marketing cannot speak about what we do as an organization without knowing from the service side and the service team like what we actually are doing. So they all have to talk to each other, and it has to be a cohesive thing. So I think too, I mean, some people outsource sales to other companies. Woo! You can't do that for this. There is no such thing with outsourcing your sales with CMMC. And if you're doing that now, talk to me. Like, I don't know what you're doing. Yeah. So,
Well, I think this brings us to the next topic, which is knowing what you're talking about. Because how frustrating is it in the sales process when you can tell that all they're trying to do is make that appointment, right? That they're trying to get that next meeting and get you through the sales process so that you can get to the person who actually knows what's going on. And if you sign an agreement for, hundreds of thousands of dollars, like, I don't know if I would be very happy about I would want to talk to somebody who really knew what they were talking about before I made a decision like that. Can you talk about how you've seen that play out? Especially, it's interesting because, you go to head to head with other MSPs and you get to, after the clients come on with us, they get to share their sales experience. They don't send us the sales slick information, but they do talk about what they've appreciated, why they picked us. And that's a pretty common one that we hear.
yeah. Yeah, so like I think the big thing with this is you can't just give a slide deck to your salesperson and expect them to sell an organization seeking a certification. And I think that goes back to the transparency and the risk that that organization has when choosing you. You're absolutely right, Bobby. They want to talk to somebody that knows what they're talking about so they can feel confident. Also, this is the scariest part, in my opinion, when talking with contractors on a regular basis is I have these conversations and I have to scope out their environment in a certain in some way as much as I can within these 3 conversations that I have with them, and without looking actually inside of their environment with my own eyes, I have to scope them as much as I can for the quote, for CMMC. And so not the average salesperson can go in and talk to a potential client and ask them the right questions and understand scoping enough to do that, and I'm not going to toot my own horn and say that I'm excellent at it, but you do have to know how
Right.
to scope, because it would be really, really bad if you quoted your potential, client for
Hmm.
50 users that were out of scope and 20 that were in, and then, 1 server and 2 firewalls, and then you go in, you're like, oh, actually, everybody is in scope. And by the way, we have on-prem servers. There's like about 5 of those.
Look at
And
this closet full of stuff, and you're
here's
like,
what you did. Here's what you did. Nothing with your sales process. You did nothing with vetting the people. You did nothing for preparing your team for the onboarding. Your project team's going to hate you because as soon as they open the door, they see all of these closets with skeletons inside that they're opening
yeah,
up. Now, I can't promise that you can do everything, because still
yeah.
people don't tell you everything, and you try your best to know as much as you can and scope as much as you can. But yeah, you have to prepare as much as you possibly can, to give them an accurate quote and to prepare your team for this onboarding if they say yes.
Well, and I think one thing that you're really good at, and you didn't really have that on the list, but I'm just going to toot the horn a little bit about what you did, is you're transparent in the pricing as well. So you show like, this is how much it is for a user in scope as well as out of scope. This is what it is for a device.
Mm-hmm.
This is what it is for the server. So, and you're very transparent when you talk with them about, here's what we know. And if you show us this closet full of devices, well, you know what the tally is going to be once we add those up, because each unit price is broken out. We don't
Yeah.
give you just $1 value and say, there you go, this is the all-in package.
Yeah.
Because if you do that and then you run into situations where they didn't tell you all of what's going on, then the client's like, well, you said this was all in, and I don't know, like, how are you basing this different delta price? So we're
Yeah.
very upfront with the client. We're saying, here's all the things that we charge. Here's what the dollar. If we get in there and all of a sudden you're saying that, it's pure cloud play, but now you talk about how you're printing all of this stuff and you're putting it over here in this environment and you're manufacturing that. We're like, you just brought your whole location into scope,
Mm-hmm.
which is not a problem.
Yeah.
It's just not what we talked about originally. And you have to go through that. And, clients, we were very transparent with that, because like, do you want to spend, weeks and weeks where we fly out and walk through and evaluate to get that detailed price? Or do you want us to provide, what our assumptions are, what it is, and the detailed pricing of that? And then if we have to pivot, we can do that.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So can you talk us through having like an efficient sales process? Because people aren't going to buy what they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so difficult to walk that balance of education and sales through that journey of CMMC. Can you help speak to that?
Yes. Okay. So this is so difficult because if you're an ESP or an MSP listening to this, there is a ton of risk for you as well as the client. You really do not want to go to onboard somebody and realize the catastrophe that you just gave to your internal team. And there has to be an effective and efficient way that you're able to ask the questions that you need to vet them, while also selling yourself and them being able to ask the questions to vet you. So you guys are both vetting each other. And if you're not doing that, you're doing the sales process for CMMC wrong, because there is so much risk for you as an MSP in your organization. If this company is awful to work with and does not listen to what you have to say, does not listen to the security requirements or the compliance requirements that you're putting in place, you are risking your reputation and your technicians' time with working with them on all of this stuff. So there is a lot of risk involved when you accept an organization like that. So you have to be prepared to ask those questions and vet those people. I have said no to multiple people that I did not feel comfortable with. There was a company that their first question or their first point was, okay, and when we have to offboard you, how much time would that take, or how much of a change to our environment would it? I'm like, I'm sorry. We're talking about onboarding and you're already talking about offboarding of us. Like, right. This is, for CMMC, offboarding an MSP that is intertwined with your controls and your SSP and whatnot, like, that is a big deal. You could potentially have a reassessment to offboard that ESP or that MSP. So somebody that is talking about our team taking so much of their time to make an SSP for them, to make a CRM for them, to make these policies and procedures for them, to make the entire container for them. They're going through all of this time and effort just for them to get dropped in a year or two is not great. I mean, it's really inefficient and not effective for you as a company, as an MSP. It's about the relationship. Also, I mean, the company might not know it at the time, but it's very bad for them. Not a good idea.
Well, it's like, the IT, the MSP is doing all of these technical pieces. It's like taking a good chunk of your foundation and you just cut a hole and you just throw it out.
Yeah.
Like, something's got to go in there. Someone's got to fill that space. So it's not like, you can't just walk off and then say, here's the keys. Like, they've got to know how to do the SIM monitoring. They've got to know how to do the change control process. They've got to know how to do the patching and the updating and the vulnerability scanning and the reassessments and the risk reviews and all of that. Someone's got to do all that.
Yeah. And when people hear this, some people get scared, right? They go, well, if you have that much power, over our stuff, why would we want you? Well, also, it's the reason why you wanted us in the first place was to take care of everything, right? So, you can't have both. You can't have us taking as much as we possibly can off your plate so that you don't have to worry about CMMC, but also us not have to take care of anything of CMMC so you could just drop us whenever you want. You cannot have both. That is not possible. So, let's just be logical here. So, sure, it is kind of scary. So that's why you vet that MSP, like your life depends on it, like your business depends on it, because it does, but also they're so beneficial because if you don't have the time, the resources, or anything like that inside of your organization, they can do so much for your organization for CMMC. Yeah.
So true. Yeah. So true. What about the effectiveness of communicating what you're selling? How difficult of a challenge was it to, and maybe that's a continuous battle for you. Maybe that's just a fight that you always have, kind of the artist always working on perfection. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So the three things that I do when talking in a sales call with somebody is, one, I get their knowledge on CMMC itself. And if it's not a lot, I try to educate as much as I can. Because if they don't know CMMC, our services don't really mean much, really. If they don't know CMMC, all they're going to see by the time you get to the quote is the dollar amount. And they will not understand anything that you are providing. So
the value.
The value.
They don't see your value.
And so they have to understand CMMC. So you're educating them on that. Then 2, educating them on an ESP in the space. Right? So there's different types of ways that you can go about tackling CMMC as an OSC. And making sure that they understand not all MSPs are made equal in this space. Some of them do certain parts of it. Some of them do all of it. Some of them just do the maintenance. You know what I mean? There's different types.
There's some that'll get you ready, but they're not going to be there to do the maintenance or actually help you pass the audit. Yeah. Their job is just they're a turnkey and thanks for coming. Have a great day. Yeah. We've heard nightmare stories of organizations coming in for a landing for their audit only to find out in the fine print that organization's not going to be there, and that's been your gig all along, and you just didn't know it, and you're just like, what the crap,
Yeah.
what? It's
Yeah. Now, if
terrible
you
sometimes.
properly prepare inside, and there's 2 or 3 people inside of your organization that are learning from that MSP that's doing it and can take that over once they're done, awesome. But you do not want to have that talk when you're going into the assessment.
No.
So there's understanding the ESP and the MSP community for CMMC, as a whole. Then the last part is actually selling yourself as like picking you. So it's kind of crazy because you go from them not even knowing the space to then them knowing the space and then understanding how you fit into the space and then understanding why you're different than the other people that are fitting into the space. So it's like you have to basically not only teach them about school, but how to get to school and what to take to school to be able to do school properly.
Mm.
And so there's so many layers to it. But one advice that I will give to somebody who is talking to an organization seeking certification and is a potential client of theirs is I definitely wouldn't say, especially not angrily, well, you guys already should have been doing this. You just should have been. You've had so much time, and I get that sometimes. I mean that is the case, but it doesn't help you sell. I will tell you that now. Now, if they need a little bit of a wake up call when they tell you that they need to be onboarded and ready to go for an assessment in 2 months, that's when you kind of go, well, that's not possible. Maybe if you would have prepped a little bit sooner, we could have. But yeah, I would just be as much sympathetic as you can, understand where they're coming from, listen to what they need as a service, and see how you can make that still happen while keeping the CMMC requirements that you have to have in their system. And that is definitely not easy, but you can learn and try your best to get that as much as you can. But that would be, my last recommendation for that process.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about the sympathy aspect of it. I find it sometimes super challenging when you're talking with a potential client and they're saying stuff that you're like, oh, this is so not like true about what they're saying.
Yeah.
Like, how do you walk that balance of being sympathetic without like constantly correcting them about their misconceptions about the ecosystem and CMMC? Because I mean, no one likes to be constantly corrected, but like, how do you walk that line? That seems like a really challenging one.
Yeah, I do. When they start speaking a lot of like nonsense, where I'm kind of like, where is this coming from? I do ask normally where they've been getting their CMMC knowledge from to kind of understand the baseline of it. And then also, what I would recommend is like resources to like for education. So not necessarily me telling them like, well, I wouldn't necessarily say that anymore. I would tell them that and be like, I would definitely check out the 32 CFR final rule on that because it does say a little bit different of than what you're saying,
Right.
but not being the last word, but rather
Mhm.
referring to documents and information that is guaranteed so they can refer to that. And then after the call, I send them that documentation. And I do send them where it says those things. So a lot of these people, I think, are getting information from somebody on their team that thinks that they know about CMMC because they've been reading LinkedIn articles or things like that.
Right.
And it's not, a full understanding of the ecosystem. And so, yeah, I would definitely recommend giving them resources afterwards and not allowing what you say to be the last word. But I also would be very careful on if there are people that are set in their ways and it is not the right ways, that it's probably just best to let them
Mm.
go, and maybe they'll have a come to Jesus moment, come to CMMC Jesus moment, and they can talk to us
Yeah.
then. But yeah.
Well, Kaylee, is there some things that you feel like you'd like to close us out with?
No, I really think that's it. These are a lot of the topics that I talked about at Seek West in my discussion. And I know that some people were asking me for these resources. And so I wanted to just come on here and just be transparent and talk about what I talked about there. And then also, if you have any questions, feel free to comment below and I can reach out to you and comment as much as I can. The biggest thing that I think that I said today is just be transparent through through your process. This is what we try to do on the podcast here. And I really encourage you guys to to do the same. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you want more information about this stuff, let me know so we can make another one. But yeah, until then, guys, keep on climbing. See ya. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.